Now, sometimes you just have those moments where you're struggling a little bit with the elements that you want to put in the track. And recently I've had a project where that has really been happening. So today I want to go through how I add an idea to the track to show you how I can make a drastic change to a track. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to leave this sound on the premium section of my Discord. So if you want to grab the presets, then you can do so. If you are a Patreon, a YouTube member, or Twitch subscriber. So this is the area that I have right now. I'm going to play you a fair bit of this section here so that you get an idea of what we're dealing with. There's already some synths that I've turned off, as you can see over here, and other synths as well. So there's actually a lot of stuff that I want to start replacing in this project because I'm not really happy with just the overall vibe of the project. And the thing that I want to replace today is going to be this massive melody line over here made up of multiple different components. So as you can hear, a cool idea for a little bit of a drop and then a breakdown after it, but the melody really isn't sticking for me. To me, it's not powerful enough. To me, it's not complex enough. To me, it's not changing enough. It is just not exactly what I want to go for in this part of the track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable it and I'm going to try to make a new element. This is probably going to be a little bit easier than making the first element because now we have access to this whole new cool plugin that we can experiment with called Serum 2. And what I want to experiment with today is actually the ARP section. So just turning it open, we get something that sounds like this just by triggering an individual note. And let's see what happens if we trigger a chord with this. So I know this track is in B, so I'm just going to lay down a 4-note chord here. Something like this so that it's going up exactly an octave maybe. Of course, want to do the same length, and we're also going to have to take care of that key change over here. But first of all, I want to set up the actual concept, which is going to be altering the speed of the notes that play in milliseconds. So let's just set this up so that we have a modulation for it. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to remove it. I believe if I set this exactly to a quarter note and then set it to hertz, yes, we get 408. And then we just have a unipolar modulation going up to very high speed here. Let's also set up a macro for the gate length. Again, unipolar here. Of course, the sound itself needs to be a little bit more interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to play with a rounded saw here, just so that we get a little bit of a nicer tone out of that. Make it a little bit plucky by modulating the wavetail position. Right, so I have a basic plug now that I've made with 3 different oscillators and a little bit of noise going through a filter. What I would like to do is I would like to make it a little bit more modern sounding with a diffuser filter here. So I'm just going to set filter 1 to go through filter 2. What we can also do is already implement our sidechaining, because I think that's going to be important with a sound like this. I still want it to be rhythmical. So we're just going to set this to the level. Holding Alt, we can lower this so that it goes halfway. And then set it to free running. What I would like to do is set this modulation exactly to 50, which it's already at, fortunately. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a macro 3 here, to the same level 2 level, or filter 2 level, sorry, 50%. And then here we set this to the same macro and then invert it. So now we have a sidechain bypass switch thing here. So that is really useful. What I would like to do as well is get a little bit more power out of the synth every once in a while. What I'm essentially doing now is I'm setting up enough modulations that I know that I'm going to be able to span this entire bridge just in changes to the sound. So in another way, what I would like to do is add a little bit of extra ambience to this. So maybe a bit of chorus. Bit of equalization to get rid of that mid-range. And I'm going to go for a nice default delay. I have a preset already made for this. I think it's going to be useful if we set up a slight change in the lower filter here, because it does get quite muddy in those like very high speed notes. What I would also like is a filter that allows me to initially have the sound come in. So that's going to be quite a strong filter, maybe 12 dB per octave, starting all the way close like this. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it come in from both the low frequency and the high frequency. So we're just going to set this to somewhere in the middle. Add another filter. This is going to open up actually from here-ish, I would say all the way open. And then this is going to be a high pass, 12. Let's go like that. And then this is going to open the other way. So we also get some mid-range opening up as well as the high frequencies opening up. And it's kind of coming from the higher mids into both the lower mids and into the high frequencies. That's a very natural way for the sound to come in. I don't want to have that happen before the delay. And then what I would like to do, and I believe it is actually possible in here, Interesting. Somehow I've created a 1/8 ping pong rhythm here. Or actually a 1/8 dotted rhythm. I was trying to experiment with like velocity setups and that kind of thing to be able to use that in our modulations. Because what you can do if you're making your own patterns is you can actually set different velocities here. And we can use that as some like semi-random repeating pattern for the modulation. So let's set this to, I don't know, a few different detune amounts that they go up a little bit. And we have different detune for different amounts here. I want to set a slight difference in this wavetable position over here. What I would probably also like to do is have a little bit of a different wavetable on this one, just that we get a little bit more variation in there as well. And then maybe over here, let's add a sync so that we can add some variation. And this is usually what I like to do, is just take a bunch of different parameters that you can set up with one modulation that is then just going to alter the sound in multiple unique ways as opposed to just one way. Let's maybe also assign that to the main filter here. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to set up another macro that is kind of going to do the same thing with this high sine wave from the sub, as well as this band over here. I'd like to maybe introduce a little bit of FM, I guess from C, because this is going to be the lowest one. Okay, so I found out how you actually reset this. You just set it to BPM, set up the exact timing that you want. It changes the timing because I set it to pattern mode, meaning that right now it is actually in the pattern that we had before. It does still seem to have a problem in that it breaks down a little bit. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to see if I can shorten these notes a bit. I believe you have to disable snap here. And then I can take all of these and actually make them I don't know why that's happening. Maybe it's just too short. Maybe that is actually what's happening. Maybe it just needs the gate to be a little bit shorter as well. Oh, I can actually see what's happening. Look at the CPU when I'm doing this. Goes to 180% CPU utilization. So I didn't know I had two CPUs, but apparently that is what it does when it goes that fast. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can render this out, and if I actually speed up, if it's going to render out nicely, or if it's actually something that is inherent to the patch that we're hearing. So just to test, I'm going to render out a version of this, which I'm going to do by duplicating this over. So now with it frozen, let's flatten it and let's see what we get. It is still because of this other one here. So what we need to do here is just quickly delete the modulation so that it doesn't consume too much CPU. And that seems to be a very, very clean sound, which means that because of the CPU was actually what we were hearing the stuttering for and not actually anything to do with the sound design itself, which is cool because that means that now we can actually use this and write in some interesting concepts. For example, what we could do is have it slow down over time, like this, and then repeat that every 4 bars. Let me quickly just set up something for this so that I can record that. We go 91 here. And I can just record the example. It's going to be gritty the first time around. But now if we remove the automations again, just temporarily, we can actually hear how that is going to sound. And just quickly testing that in context, we get something that sounds like this. Which I think is really cool sounding. So I'm just going to Control Z until we get that shape back. And I think actually in terms of the shape, we got something pretty nice. So what I want to do is I want to just slightly change the tonality for every play that we're going to get. And I want to see if there's an easy way that we can do that with some of the macros that we have. Of course, one of the things that I would want to do is just automate some of the macros. So that is a macro that we already had. We also have the gate, of course. What we can do is we can like change gate lengths for some of these. Maybe that's not that interesting. Maybe it's more interesting to flow with it. Like that. And then like that. So that it does change from time to time, but it's not like a stable position. And it gives it another morphing effect. When it comes to these shapes, there's not really much intention that goes behind it from my side. In the sense that I'm not sitting here exactly thinking about, okay, this automation should do that, this automation should do that. It is a little bit unfortunate that in this current case, we cannot just listen to what the sound is going to do because of those CPU issues. But otherwise, of course, I would just listen through it and make changes wherever I need to based on what I'm actually hearing, what I like and what I don't like. For now, though, what I'm going to do is I'm just kind of going to randomly guess where all of these macros are going to go. This one, I kind of forgot track of exactly what it's doing. I believe somewhere in the effects, it is maybe doing something. Oh, it is the sidechain. Yes, so this is the sidechain amount. And then we have like two tonal changes over here and together with a macro, which is the filter. So I'd like to start with some sidechaining and then just like lower it over time here. And then what I think I'm going to do to complement that is quickly go into my kick and bass and assign another high pass filter right over here. So just copy that over to my kick. And that way we can lower the sidechain here already. And that is going to work nicely with the actual transformation that is going to start happening, I guess, a little bit early. And then it really starts to happen in here. So as you can see, this is the moment in the little fill where we're predominantly switching from a very sidechain signal to a very non-sidechain signal. So I think that is going to work well going into the breakdown, and that's going to give us a nice flow into the breakdown, I think. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to set up some of these macros here. So this one is going to be like a general rise, I think, down, and then rise again into the build-up. What I would maybe want to do is also have this higher one just come in over time, so that it starts off a little bit lower in terms of just its tonality, because the highest octave just isn't in there. We have another macro over here. This is also kind of like a tonal shift, messing around with some of the parameters. This one is going to flow, starting high and kind of going down low, switching over here, and then switching back over here. In the middle somewhere, nice flowy mode like automation on there. And finally this one too. This one is going to go up because this is the filter. I want that to kind of go up into the fill, close on the break again, stay like nice and open here, maybe a little bit longer. We can add another point here to make this smooth as well. I really like these kind of smooth automations. It feels like it's a nice, like almost natural flow to it. And then over here, we're going to flow up again. I'm guessing a little bit more towards the end here, maybe just like a natural glide up like that. All right, now that we have that, let me lower that a little bit, but let's try to render this out. Again, going to duplicate this over and then freeze, Right, having flattened that, we get a very interesting waveform with almost nothing showing up over here. So I'm wondering what's going on there, if I set up some of the modulations wrong maybe. But what I'm going to do is I'm temporarily just going to take this and drag it into current projects. So I can drag it in here, meaning that I can save it and then delete it from the project itself. So that way we don't get its CPU issues. Now let's have a listen to what this sounds like. So I think there's three things that we need to take care of here. One, it is coming in a little bit late and it is kind of going down in volume all the way here. I think that has to do with the filtering. The second thing is that I've missed around the sidechain. So the sidechain is active where I don't want it to be and it isn't active where I do want it to be. So we're just going to have to switch around the automation for the sidechaining. And then finally, I'm not really happy with the speed and the rhythm at the end here. What I would like to be able to do is set up a system in which it is actually the same every time, because it does seem like, for example, here the last beat, if you look at where the note is with respect to the beat versus this one, is definitely different. So let's see if we can tackle all of those things, and then I think we should have a pretty cool element for our track. So this thing, very easy, should just be there, and then adjusting this to be balanced like that. For the filtering, we're just going to go into the effects, and we're just going to set this a little bit higher, this a little bit lower, like that. And now it should already filter in a little bit earlier as well. And finally, macro one, we're going to have to edit it a little bit and see if we can set it up in a way that it always re-triggers. I believe the way that we do that is we have to start the notes every segment. So every segment we start with a new set of notes. What this also is, of course, going to allow us to do is actually think about the key changes that we had. Because if you remember the older melody and some of the pads in here, there's actually key changes in here. So you can see that here we go up in key from where we were before. You can see the key change from here going up 5 semitones. And then later on, it goes from 5 semitones high here to 3 semitones high. So that's what we want for these two. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. What I would like to do is, of course, make sure that everything is in the right key if I'm doing this. So something like this may work. I'm not going to be sure until I, of course, check, which we're again going to do by duplicating this over, dragging it in here. This is going to make a version 2 of it, as you can see. So I'm always going to know which one is the latest version that I've made. Then we can just delete the actual version that we have and freeze it. So having flattened it, this is what we get. Unfortunately, there is still a little bit of an issue in that in the area where the key changes, it is going down too much in my opinion. So I'm quickly just going to go back once more to just change what the filtering automation is doing over here. So that is macro number 4. We're just going to make sure that that goes to halfway. And that is going to mean that it's not going to close too much here. In fact, what we can actually do is maybe slightly alter the shape so that it just stays a little bit higher like this. And it only really goes to the high part in the actual buildup. So let's again save this version. And then let's freeze this again. All right, that is really starting to look like the kind of thing that I'm after. In this case, what it is, it's going to be just much louder in the break. I still can make changes to it to make sure that just volume-wise it comes in a little bit earlier. That is going to depend on the mixing, but I feel like what we have now is going to be a cool idea. So let's just see what happens if we press play on this. That is sounding pretty cool already. I'm going to try to mix it into the track and see how it goes as an actual part of the track. So let's have a listen to what we actually have. Alright, I think overall that is a very, very cool sound. So what I'll probably end up doing is I'll end up experimenting and tweaking with this a lot more. As you can see, it's a little bit more of a slower process because of all of the freezing that we have to do. But there's definitely some really cool, interesting sound design techniques that are going to come out of this. The last thing that I want to try, since we have this, is being able to record the MIDI directly so that I don't have to trigger it, maybe, with the arpeggiator. Maybe that is where the actual CPU problem is coming from, although I do think that it is in just handling the sheer amount of MIDI notes that we're sending. I think that is the main problem here. I just want to try if it's possible to just take input from Serum if we set it to in the arpeggiator to have MIDI out for the arp here. If I can then go into track 91 and just take MIDI input from Serum 2 directly. I guess this is recording the MIDI from Serum 2. This is going to have to be CPU intensive because we are, of course, playing the patch now, but I hope that, again, by recording the MIDI, it saves somehow some CPU cycles. What is actually fairly interesting is that we have it repeating differently, right? So you can see that the final note is always a different note and also in a different spot. What we can do now is we can just manually copy the version that we like the most and just use that everywhere and transpose it as we have to as well. But I'm hoping mainly that this is going to solve our CPU issues. So if I just copy this over and theoretically all we have to do is turn off the arpeggiator. And this is just instantly going to work. But I'm doubting that it's going to save any CPU doing this. So let's delete this guy. Yeah, it's just the sheer amount of notes that you're sending it is the problem. Okay. Well, that means that I would need to continue freezing this stuff to be able to experiment with it. And therefore, I'm not going to bore you with all of those things. And I'm just going to let you go on with your day and with your sound design ideas, because this is going to be the end of this video. Now, if you find this kind of stuff interesting, let me know by leaving a like and make sure that you're subscribed. Also, leave a comment down below on what you would like to see next. And of course, another way to support the channel, as I mentioned before, is to do so financially. That's also a way that you can get the presets, but you can also get priority in feedback streams, access to discount codes for my products, and many more benefits. So if you're interested in that, check it out. But I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.